Hello, fellow fantasy sports fans. Welcome to MFSN, the Hub's fantasy football strategy show every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific. Actually, we're transitioning away from just football because it's that time of year. Championship games, they really already happened. Now, of course, the big, oh, look at Ross. He's got it looks like a baseball
softball championship.
trophy, softball championship
Softball
from football.
championship. Got it right here. Want to show off to all the fans out there.
So let me first do this right in the new year. I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. I'm here with Kasey, Vlad to the Bone, Shienvold, and Ross the Boss.
Hey everybody, I'm Ross the Boss, and I want to talk fantasy sports with you, cowboy.
All right. So listen, almost no discussion about sports right now can't start with Damar Hamlin. Obviously, this was a very, very scary incident. Very upsetting to so many, and everybody's hoping that he's doing well. The latest reports are that he is doing significantly better. And so we're thrilled to hear that. It's a funny thing when you're in a fantasy league and then something happens in real life. It puts things in perspective about what really does matter. And I think everybody was left feeling almost weird about even discussing who gets the winnings, who comes in first, because so many of these matchups couldn't really be finished. And of course, that's secondary. Yeah, go ahead.
It's not like you're talking about two teams that don't have a lot of fantasy stars on them. So how many games were actually, you're talking the Bengals and the Bills, two of the most high-powered offenses. So it really did put a wrench into a lot of fantasy championships.
So, on this show, when football season ends, we come to a place where we could talk about fantasy basketball. We could talk about dynasty football. We can even start talking about baseball. But we also can just talk about general strategy in fantasy sports. And that really includes how leagues should be run, how commissioners should handle situations like this. Hopefully there aren't situations like this again. But a lot of leagues basically had to just split the trophies. They just had to say, well, we can't finish up this way. And why is that? In part, these Bills and Bengals players, that game's in all likelihood not going to be made up. And then on top of it, even if they do play in week 18, are all of those players going to play? Are they going to play a full schedule? It really, throws things out of whack. And I think a lot of people just felt, let's just split the pot. Ross, how did you handle it in the MFSN league?
So, there's two ways you can do this. There's two ways, and there's two ways in all these leagues I've been doing different ways. You can do co-champions, which we're doing in the MFSN league, in which we take the pot for the first and second place, combine it, and then divide it in half. Honestly, I was behind by 30 points, and I had Josh Allen going. So it's up in the air. Instead of arguing and getting all that stuff, we just kind of came up with a solution. Let's just cut it in half. You get half, I get half. We're co-champions. There you go. The other way people are doing it is they're just going it like, you know what? The game didn't end. And we're just going to do what the points had at the end of the week, and that's the winner. So basically, there's two things you can do. You can either split it in half, or you can just whatever the points are ended up at the end of the season. That's what it is. So it's a sad thing. I was very distraught about the whole thing for days. I still am. But the good news, like you mentioned today, is he's actually he used his hands and wrote something and said, "Did we win?" Which is kind of funny. It's something I think I would ask the first thing if I woke up from a coma. And he has movement of his hand. He was squeezing one of his loved one's hands.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. So to come out of a coma, and I had a friend that had a heart attack years ago, and almost the same thing, and he didn't have the response like this guy had. This guy had to wait for the ambulance to come and everything else, and he actually died. And a very good friend of mine. And basically, that's what I was thinking. I was just thinking, how long did his brain go without air?
Yeah,
it's
very, very scary.
Because you guys being both doctors, how important it is for your body to breathe, and you missing X amount of minutes. You're talking about brain damage. You know what I mean? So all that being said, to hear that he can even write and all that stuff, that's unbelievable. So I was in a great mood today. And as you guys know, being in charge of the MFSN league, I actually reached out, and I just want to make sure everybody gets paid this week. So there you go.
So I want to say hi to Albert Merquin. He says, good afternoon. Good to see you here, Albert. Let us know if you have any questions. Even though we're heading into the off season, we know fantasy sports never go away, and that includes football. We're big dynasty fans, so we can talk about any of these things. But I will say, when it comes to Damar Hamlin, we were all hoping for the best for him, certainly. But the other thing about it is, with him coming through, it makes this event scary and upsetting, but not a tragedy if he comes through okay. And that is all that really matters. So we're thinking of him and his family, and it put in perspective what really matters. But with that said, let's jump back in to some fantasy sports discussion. We know that it provides a lot of relief and escape for people. Let's talk dynasty a little bit first, because we're still really in the thick of football. Now, Ross, I've told you, we're going to start up a dynasty league. I've been recruiting people. We got it ready. So we're going to be doing this. There's going to be essentially what is an MFSN dynasty league coming up. And so let's say you're drafting from the start. Who do you draft first? We're going to say Superflex. Okay. Superflex league.
Oh, so Superflex league. So Superflex league, it's totally different than who I would take first in a regular draft.
Well, let's compare the two then.
Okay. So in a super draft, I would say, guys, and you guys can think I'm crazy or wrong or whatever. I would think there's 6 quarterbacks that can win you your championship league. 6. That's
6.
it.
That's more than I thought. I got to be honest.
I mean, I'm pushing a little bit because Jared Goff's having a pretty good year, so I'm kind of throwing him in there. But I would say 6, dynasty? Maybe 5, Kasey. But I think in a Superflex league, it's so important to take that elite quarterback, the Hurts, the Allen, I want to say it, Kasey. Ready? The Burrow. I said it.
Burrow.
Joe Burrow. It's so important to take Mahomes. One of those elite guys that you want in the Superflex. Again, this is Superflex, which means you can start 2 quarterbacks. So
and for people who are listening out there who don't do dynasty, let's just make this clear. Dynasty leagues, you keep your entire roster. Anybody that you have, you get to keep the next year if you want. So, Jared Goff is a good quarterback, but are we going to take him in round 1 of a dynasty? Probably not. I'm sure
probably not no.
either.
But if it's not Superflex, my number 1 draft pick, Kasey, hit the drum roll. Justin Jefferson, Minnesota Vikings. He's my number 1 pick
in a dynasty.
In a dynasty. If I was doing dynasty, I would have to research and look at ages and stuff because, as we know, we want to take somebody in their early.
Jefferson's young. Are we talking? So we're talking a 1 quarterback league now. We've shifted away from Superflex.
I would still take Justin Jefferson as my first pick. Yes.
I think
I get that. That's a smart bet.
Okay, Albert Merquin has a question. Where do you guys have Trevor Lawrence ranked in dynasty? Albert, by the way, I'm going to assume this is a Superflex league, but we can talk about it either way. So where do we rank him? Kasey, I'll turn it over to you first. Where do you rank?
If I had to, it would be somewhere in the quarterbacks themselves. It would be somewhere in the 6 to 9, 6 to 10 range.
That sounds right to me. Yeah.
I mean, because look, Mahomes and Josh Allen to me are your clear 1 and 2.
Not Hurts.
Maybe not in that order.
Wow.
Hurts. If Hurts does it another year, then he enters the top. But I would still draft him 3rd. Burrow probably 4th. 5th would be Justin Herbert because I still think he's young and capable. He didn't have the greatest year, but his team was devastated by injuries. That's when you then get into, is Trevor Lawrence the next in line? And he very well could be. I mean, is Deshaun Watson going to be healthy? Now he's like 27, 28. Does that affect his value much? But
well, hold on. Also, does it affect his value much that he's on the Browns? And the answer is yes. It's going to be ugly.
Says a longtime Browns fan, obviously.
I'm wearing a Bills shirt again, and that's not just for Damar Hamlin, but partially for him.
Tua is too fragile, obviously. Like he's just gets concussed kneeling and at points. It seems like he's taking too many hits. So who else would you put in that list? So I think Trevor Lawrence is somewhere in that 6, 7, 8 range. I could see him going anywhere there in the quarterback ranking.
Yeah, but I will say this, even though that's where he falls in the quarterback rankings, even in Superflex, would you take Trevor Lawrence ahead of Justin Jefferson in Dynasty? I would not.
I would take him
as a drop-off.
Yeah, I think if I picked in that latter part of the first round in a Dynasty league, I wouldn't probably take a quarterback. I would probably take a Justin Jefferson, a Jamar Chase, maybe Jonathan Taylor if you think he's healthy again. Is Kenneth Walker for real? Like, there's some players you would consider position players over quarterback at that point, and then maybe look to get Trevor Lawrence with my second pick.
This is another topic of conversation when it comes to Dynasty about the value of running backs. We talked about this even in the MFSN league, which is a redraft league, about whether wide receivers are much more valuable than running backs. Now, it was a PPR league, so of course that's going to be the case, that wide receivers are going to be more valuable. But we also, all three of us, and Ross, you were the one who really started talking about this first, the idea that running backs really just don't have as central a role on teams anymore, generally speaking. There's very few of them that do. So when you're looking at Dynasty, running backs have a very short shelf life and that role is getting reduced. I wouldn't take any running back in round one myself. Ross, what do you think?
I agree 100%. I mean, it's a whole new game. The Terrell Davises, the Priest Holmeses, they're not here anymore. Kasey Shienvold,
Yeah.
they're not
No,
here
I
to
agree.
win your league. I mean, back in the day, we would draft Priest Holmes first and we win the league. I mean, it's that easy back then. Or Brett Favre.
3 years ago, we would have drafted Christian McCaffrey first.
There you go. Or Christian Okoye. Remember him? The Nigerian nightmare, Kasey Shienvold.
Oh, yes.
It was unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
But all that being said,
the
the years of the running back taking over fantasy are over. Like you guys said, it's all about wide receiver. And yes, you can get a mid-range running back like a Connor or something like that in the 6th or 7th round, and he'll do fine. But
yeah, I mean, imagine if you had waited and got Tony Pollard this year.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. That's a great example, Case. I mean, Tony Pollard had he had unbelievable games this year.
He was better than Zeke for most of the year.
Pick somebody who is irreplaceable. By the way, Just Bob saying, hello, gentlemen. Hello, Ross. His usual sign on. Just Bob, is great to see you here. We're talking a bunch of Dynasty. We know I think you have 38 leagues, if I remember correctly, something like that. And maybe
was in the
you have another
finals
one
in
coming.
Most of them. Yeah, but back to Trevor Lawrence, I think I would still rank Lamar Jackson above him. It would be close if he's healthy. And then Justin Fields this year, is he now?
Oh, I think Fields has leapfrogged.
I had Justin in one of the top 6. I had one in the top 6.
I think Fields.
We have Just Bob's asking for our email. I will put that in the chat, Just Bob, while Kasey responds. Keep going, Case.
And so, quarterback, you're right. The top 4 or 5 in a super flex, the top 4 or 5 are probably, to me, the top 4 or 5 picks of the draft, because you can't win a super flex by drafting at 1, 2, 3, or 4 and not taking a quarterback and then waiting until like pick 26 to finally get your first quarterback. I just think at that point you might as well wait until pick 50, because the difference between the 12th ranked quarterback and the 18th ranked quarterback probably isn't significant. And so, but the top 5 are the top 5. I don't think they're really up for debate. It's who you put in that 6, 7, 8, 9 range. And Trevor Lawrence is in that discussion. I think if he got a better weapon, another pass catcher, that would help him significantly. Christian Kirk started off great, then faded at the end of the year. Zay Jones had 3 or 4 where he was just looked like Justin Jefferson's little brother. But they don't have a big threat, and that holds you back is your quarterback value.
We're about to read, by the way, Just Bob's stats from 36 leagues, not 38. He was in 28 semifinals. He had 12 first place finishes, 9 seconds, 6 thirds, 1 fourth.
Well done, Bob.
Just Bob's
and I know your name's not Bob, but
unbelievable. But yeah, Kasey, you're right. I mean, you're not going to win your league having like Russell Wilson as your quarterback.
I'm a Giants fan. Daniel Jones got us to the playoffs. Hats off to him for what he did to the Colts last week. But he's not going to be the secret to your success in fantasy.
No, and you really got to bear down. I know everybody loves to wait to draft a quarterback. I know that was a strategy last year. Everybody was telling me, I'm going to wait till the 5th or 6th round to get a quarterback, And I said, great, but you're not going to get the elite guy. You're not going to get Mahomes. You're not going to. You probably won't get Allen either. I mean, the big find in the late rounds, not really late, the mid rounds was Hurts. I mean, he was the big gem this year, I would say.
Most of the leagues I won are because I I banked on him and I stacked him with AJ
Well,
Brown
there
in
you go.
in 3 different leagues, and I won 2 of them and came in third in the other one because
I
Hurts
mean,
missed the last 2 games.
Let me ask you, how important or how useful is stacking? You know, stacking to me seems like a very underrated strategy. Everyone says like, well, but some weeks you're going to have low scores. That's not the point. I
stacking.
want
Well,
boom or bust.
right. Stacking, I think, is a great strategy if you have an elite quarterback and elite wide receiver on the same team. Like if you can't
Because you're going to
stack,
win those weeks almost all the time.
you
when they
can't stack
blow-
Daniel Jones and Richie Davis. Like that's not a stack, right? You can't stack. But if you have Tua and Tyreek Hill, or if you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, I mean, or Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, then stacking is brilliant because every touchdown thrown to AJ Brown is 2.
Well, and then, so when you're setting up your draft, if you're factoring in stacking, which I really do think is a good idea to do, you got to figure out where can you get those guys. Ross, you were talking about if you wait, you can't get, certain guys. But, what if you could get Justin Jefferson in the first round and pick up Kirk Cousins later? That's not a bad stack at all. And you got a quarterback for cheap.
I mean, it's weird, guys. This year was a weird year for quarterbacks. A lot of quarterbacks got hurt, a lot more than usual. I mean, if you guys noticed. So, I mean, sometimes in leagues, if it's a 1 quarterback league, I kind of like, well, I won't even draft a second quarterback. But if I do wait on a quarterback and pick somebody up like a Kirk Cousins, I will draft somebody quicker as my second string quarterback just to have them on the bench.
Sure.
Because
A better
I'm worried
backup.
I'm worried about people getting hurt. I'm worried about quarterbacks not having a good year. So if I don't draft an elite quarterback, I'll be drafting, like, I'm just saying Kirk Cousins, like a Kirk Cousins, and then maybe like a Mike White or somebody, or Tua right after that, or who knows what I would do. But
Yeah.
I mean, so if you don't draft elite guy, you really have to go out and make sure your second string guy is up to par.
Okay, Just Bob says stacking is amazing in certain situations, not all. And then he says you need studs first.
Yep.
And I do think this is, we're talking drafts. It's funny. The season just ended and like we're salivating over drafts. That shows what kind of people we are. We really want to play this game a lot. So, I think when you're looking at drafts and kind of planning, one of the rules of thumb that I have is you can't win your draft early, but you can lose it. If you pick somebody who's risky, that can be a big problem. Just try not to lose your draft. Pick the studs first. Let stacking come to you. I don't think you want to be too wed to things. Ross, do you agree with this?
Oh, I agree. I think when you're drafting, you should always go for the best player available. I always say that. That's my rule of thought. It's very important that you don't go after a player just because you have that player's quarterback or that receiver or whatever. You want to go after the best player available. I mean, that's how you win leagues. I mean, that's how it gets done. I mean, it's fun to stack.
Early.
And I might disagree with that a little bit, Ross, because I agree in baseball that's a great theory because it's a 6-month season with 100 and some odd games, and making trades and moves is a lot easier. But when we talk about drafting, and I know Dan and I use this a lot, the tier system, like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 at each position. Like if the guy at the bottom of tier 1 in wide receivers is available, but he won't be available to me later, but the guy at the top of tier 2 in running backs might be a better player, I still want the tier 1 wide receiver because of the value he gives me at the position. And so to me, it's not as simple as best player available. If I don't have a good wide receiver and the drop off between the guy available and who I can get 3 rounds later is much worse than the drop off at a different position, even though that position might be better, I'm going to take where I'm getting the most value.
And guys, another rule of thumb that people always do, and it's a huge mistake, and I'm guilty of it. I think Kasey, you're guilty of it too. And Dan, I know you are, is you're chasing last year's stats. You're a guy that's chasing what the guy did unbelievable last year. You're saying he's good, like Jonathan Taylor. He did unbelievable last year. He really did. He had an unbelievable year last year. And this year he was horrible. I mean, he was the first pick in most leagues and he did nothing. It was
not
awful.
only that, I mean, he set a price tag. The price tag on him is just going to be super high. You want to look for the next Jonathan Taylor.
There you go.
Right. And that's actually where I get in the most trouble is, one of the things we talk about is if you want to be a really good fantasy sports owner or competitor, you have to know what your weaknesses are right? Because
Yep.
know what you're good at, but also know where your weaknesses are, so you don't let them get the best of you. Kind of the GI Joe approach, right? And mine is, I fall in love with the young potential, even though there's no track record for it, right? Like, so I'm looking at this month, at April's draft for next year, and I'm already thinking, okay, who's going to be the steal of that draft that I can sneak, instead of saying, well, wait, there's 15 guys available that are more reliable and have kind of the history to back it up. And so I tend to sometimes chase youth, and that's, in dynasty, that's important.
Exactly. Yes.
But not necessarily anywhere else.
So I have one of the opposite weaknesses, which is if I haven't seen it at all, I tend to be late to the game, which means I miss a lot of things. Here's a good example of it. Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel really just wasn't showing it for a little while, and I was not buying. I was not buying it and not buying. In fact, when we did our MFSN rankings,
then you
this is
overpaid
hilarious.
for him, like you traded for him, didn't
Well,
you?
I did. But first, I ranked him so low because I was like, I don't think he has it. And then he exploded, and then I traded for him. I gave in. But Kasey's right. You got to know yourself as a fantasy manager. You got to know, like I also overreact to certain things. You know, if a player has a really bad week, I know, don't think of it that way. I want to see a longer trend. I'm going to go ahead and believe in the guys that I went after. I have a tendency to doubt myself in that way. You got to know, how to work things so that you don't fall prey to whatever your own weaknesses are. Let me ask you a question. Since we're kind of getting into other sports some, we can always dip back into football as needed. And in fact, I want to hear from the audience. If you want us talking dynasty football this whole time, we can. We're going to dabble in some other things. Kasey would love it. But, how much do these strategies fit over the other sports? How different is fantasy football than these other sports? By the way, Margie Bell says, I like Ross the Boss.
I like you too, Margie. I hope you're doing well in Kentucky.
Margie has good taste and clearly actually knows Ross. So, guys, what do you think in terms of how much does all of this strategy stuff we talk about really cross over into the different sports? I mean, like what we were just talking about with tiers versus best player available. I think that one crosses over easily. But then there are certain ones that don't as much. Go ahead, Case.
Well, football is unique in that all but 2 games are all played on the same day every week, right? Like in baseball or basketball, you'll have teams playing Tuesday night and then not again and then Friday night and then not again till the next Wednesday or whatever it may be. It's less common to have everybody playing on the same night, right? And so you don't have to necessarily make the choice about who am I going to start at shooting guard or who am I going to start at small forward because, well, Giannis doesn't have a game tonight, so I can put, Tatum in that spot or whatever it may be and not lose out on that. Whereas in football, like you have 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a flex or whatever it is. And they all play between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. You know who has a bye that week, but outside of the bye weeks, you're always choosing between 2 or 3 players. And so it is a different animal in that respect. And you have to be like, you have to take the temperature of how risk averse you are with certain players. Like, well, AJ Brown is better than this receiver, but AJ Brown is going up with Gardner Minshew against the best pass defense, whereas Zay Jones is going against Tennessee, and you have to make that choice. So the strategy, I think, is a lot more intense or nuanced or complex when it comes to football as opposed to the other sports.
I'd love to hear from people out there, just Bob, Albert Mariquin, anybody else who's out there. I want to hear what your take is on fantasy basketball and fantasy baseball. There's so many people out there who are just like, I'm 100% fantasy football and that's it. And then there are other people who are like, I can't get enough. I mean, Ross and I, Kasey, you're in the hockey league ostensibly, but
I'm a space filler.
But Ross and I really actually go at it. Ross,
we do, and we always go after each other. We're first and second every year.
Party Marty this week.
But yeah. I mean, to go back to comparing the different fantasy sports, I mean, football there's a lot of other variables you got to deal with. Like a team like Baltimore, they like to run the ball. They don't like to pass. And, a team like Cincinnati, they like to pass the ball first. So it depends who the coaches are and all that stuff. In baseball, it's more like an individual sport. If you think about it, I mean, you're batting. I mean, your job as a batter is to get on base. I mean, that's your job, to walk, to hit, home run, whatever it is. I mean, and that's everything is scored, and it's all very done with stats. I mean, stats are so important. And age isn't really a huge factor in baseball compared to football. You know what I mean, Casey? It's
Sure.
not really like, you know, if you hit 30, like, I don't know if you guys ever saw Logan's Run, unbelievable movie. You guys,
Oh yeah.
you guys are too young, but I mean,
No,
Logan's Run,
I saw it, but then when I turned 30, they killed me.
they kill.
Okay.
So the whole thing about Logan's Run is when you hit 30, you know, you die basically. They put you in this game that you think you can win, and you die anyway. But I probably ruined the movie.
I wouldn't think I could win that. No,
it
Not if
was
everybody
a
else
fixed
died.
game. No one won it except, I don't want to ruin the movie. But long story short, you could play baseball till you're over 30. I mean, you can still get the stats. You can still hit a home run.
Look at what Paul Goldschmidt did this year. I mean,
Look
how
at-
old is Paul
the
Goldschmidt?
poll hosts. I mean, look at him. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
unbelievable. So
Look
I
what
mean,
Bonds was doing at the
football-
end of his career.
Football and you're running back. I mean, you have 3 years and then you're done. I mean, unless you're a freak like some players, but I mean, 3 years and then you're kind of on the downhill. You know what I mean? So you got to draft another running back.
So Just Bob says my two loves, fantasy baseball and football. We got at least one fan out there who's not all football, which is good to hear because we're going to be talking a lot, especially about baseball. We
do basketball too. I mean, basketball we play and we're in the
basketball. I can talk about, but not with a lot of expertise. I don't have the stats to back it up.
But with basketball, we're always looking for that hot player. We're always looking for a guy that it fills in for a player that's hurt and he's having a hot 2 weeks. You know, we always look for that in basketball, especially compared to baseball or even football. Basketball, it's a sport where you got to pay attention just because that player will get hot and will take somebody's place that is hurt. And that's how you win the league, is you get these players when they're hot. So basketball is a whole different animal.
Take a look at this. What Just Bob said is really interesting if you think about it this way. Running backs timeline, 800 touches. That's not that many in the grand scheme of things. It shows you how rough it is in that game. I mean, and you see the difference, you know, when you get a running back to age 27.
And then whenever you see these guys at like the Hall of Fame games or the old timers days, they're barely able to walk when they're coming onto the stands because they've been so crushed for so long.
Yeah, or they can't even, like, they have migraine headaches. I have a friend who actually we interviewed on MFSM, my friend Rick Cunningham, who I play football with, and he's suing the league because he has that condition where he has a migraine 24 hours a day. His mind's not there. And, you know, it's been going on for years. I mean, he even did a write-up about it in the New York Times about his case.
Well, you know, I find that it makes being a fantasy football fan a little bit fraught because you know what's happening to these guys. I mean, Damar Hamlin really brought it to the fore. We're watching that, and it's just like, obviously that was a freak accident, but in some ways, but you're playing at a game where people are getting hit at that speed. Go ahead,
and I was going to say, and credit to the broadcast for not re-showing it over and over and over again. I was really glad they didn't show it, because in the past, that's what they used to do. I still remember, was it Tim Crumry in the Super Bowl where you watched his leg just like dangle like a fish out of water?
Ross is a Bengals fan, so he would remember that all the better.
You know, and
they just showed
Cincinnati's always had some bad injuries when it comes to games, and even like years ago, during opening day at a Reds game, one of the umpires actually had a heart attack on the field and died. And
I remember that on opening day.
Yeah, opening day. Yeah, and it's just, I don't know if it's the city of Cincinnati, which I love and enjoy. I'm a big fan of there. My daughter goes to school right nearby Cincinnati. You know, I love the town, but I don't know if it's like
cursed.
I don't know if it's cursed. I have no idea. But again, it's just sad. It's just to watch that live. I watched it live, and because you guys know I'm a big Bengals fan, and as soon as I saw him go down, I just knew something was. I never seen a player.
I was watching the game, and what it reminded me of, because I'm a big soccer fan. I know Ross and Dan, you guys know this, but I'm a nuts about professional soccer, and I was watching the Euros in 2020, and Christian Eriksen for Denmark. The same thing happened. Like, he wasn't hit though; he was just walking to to pick up the ball to make a throw in, and just collapsed.
Right,
and then they had to do CPR and like they made a big kind of shield around him because the cameras were just like on him, because they weren't sensitive to it at all. And just watching his family running down from the stands and watching like his teammates, because these are, like they're a family more than anything. Like, just like in football, they spend so much time together. Like, they were broken by watching this. And it just reminded me of that. And all three of us are old enough to remember Hank Gathers too. Same.
Oh yeah.
I watched that live too.
Same kind of thing where like it brought all of that haunting kind of feeling back. Like, it was horrible.
Yeah.
These things are horrific, and that's another reason we're so happy that Damar Hamlin seems to be coming through okay.
Yeah, and guys, I mean, I'll say it. I know you guys know the story, but what a great story about his Toys for Tot.
I know it's over like $3 million.
No, it's Kasey. It's not $3 million. So he was trying to raise $2,500.
Right, I know.
And now it's over $7 million.
Is it up to 7? I was talking about 2 days ago when I read about it.
$7 million they raised for Toys for Tots for his local town.
Unbelievable.
Which Case, is that near you? It's not.
He's a Pittsburgh guy, so that's about 3.5. It's actually closer to Dan than it is to me. Like, he grew up in Pittsburgh, was a top safety, defensive back prospect, and could have picked any college. Chose to stay home and go to Pitt. Yep. Became co-captain of them when they were super good with Kenny Pickett and the receiver who's now at USC,
Addison.
Yep. And he was always well liked and well respected, and it's great. I mean, I'm super glad he's okay. Obviously, a lot of people in my area,
long way to go, but it just shows you guys like about humanity. You know what I mean? We always say like, we always hear the bad things. We always hear all the horrible things that people do. People that happen throughout the year, but this is like to hear like just people giving $7 million of their hard-earned money to Toys for Tots in a small town in Pennsylvania, because this man,
I remember Andy Dalton gave a bunch of money, because if you remember, Andy Dalton, like, was it all the Buffalo Bills fans who contributed to his charity once he knocked somebody out of the playoffs so the Bills could make the playoffs a few years ago? And so, like, he did the same and donated that amount of money back. Zach Taylor earned a lot of respect for me too. Like, the way he handled it, the grace he handled it with, and that he wasn't caring about the football game at all anymore at that point. And, I mean, hats off to the city of Cincinnati almost in its entirety for the way it's kind of rallied around this whole thing. So
yeah, I agree.
Ross, you're hitting the nail on the head. I think the things that make us feel like it's not all bad. There's a lot of good stuff here. I think it even happens in fantasy leagues when we have to find a way to basically compete with each other, but not get so ferocious. I mean, this should be about bringing people together. And a lot of times it is. People are keeping in touch through these leagues and things like that. It's actually one of the reasons I love Dynasty as much as I do. There's literally always something you can do. The season ends, and then you're like, okay, now let's get back to trading. And of course, Ross, I don't know if you like trading quite as much as Kasey and I do. We just love trades. Like,
I do. I just, I do trade. That's not, I enjoy trading.
Well, you're going to love Dynasty then. And I want to ask the fans out there, again, we can talk about all kinds of things. We're in the heart of our basketball season. I just don't know how much people are into that. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about basketball until I hear from you guys that that's what you want to hear about. But there's a fierce competition out there and by the way, I'm trying to survive in that league. My injuries have just mounted and mounted. Karl Anthony Towns is one of those major problems, and he's not getting back soon. And I always feel weird saying it too. This is a real human being just trying to do his job and work his way back. It's not like he owes me to get back on the roster, but that's a funny thing about these sports. And I think, I don't know, maybe some people like to take the basketball season off. I need something to get me through until baseball.
Yeah. I mean, basketball season, it's fun. I'm not into it. I mean, I watch basketball once in a while, not as much as football, but it is fun. It just keep me going through until baseball starts, until football starts too. So
why don't we do this? We'll dabble some in basketball probably next time, unless somebody brings up questions about it. If you have trades in mind for basketball or strategy, just let us know. We're going to talk Dynasty also, but I want to talk a little bit about the surprises of the fantasy football year, because this is the wrap up. Everybody played their championships last week mostly. And let's talk about the biggest surprises of the year, the biggest disappointments. I saw some coverage of it, where people were saying like, can you imagine people who stacked Tom Brady and Mike Evans.
In the final week, that was
In the
great.
final
Up
week,
until
yes,
then, it was horrible.
But you know what? All those people who even did that, did they even play those guys?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but would you really stack a guy who's 40? I mean, nothing against 45 years old. Again, God bless.
I wouldn't have it as my main strategy.
Considering what he did at 44, like
I agree, but I wouldn't draft a guy to be my starting quarterback. No offense, don't get mad. I don't want to see any emails or letters. But 45 years old to be your starting quarterback in your fantasy league, you're just you're out there to fail. I'm just telling you guys right now.
I like how Ross set it up. It made it sound like Kasey and I are just always emailing him and sending him letters.
Well, it's funny, right? Letters, like who writes letters anymore? But you're 100% right. Yeah. But I want to hear. I'll go last. I want to hear you guys' biggest like hits this year and the biggest disappointments. I want to hear what you guys say, and then I'll chime in.
For our own teams or just in general?
Overall, it's overall. Who in your mind, Kasey, was your like biggest surprise that did unbelievable, and who is your biggest disappointment? Go.
Before you do that, though, Just Bob says sometimes you have to start Tom Brady due to injuries. So
we know that, yeah. But I'm saying you're drafting in the league, and your number one quarterback you pick is Tom Brady.
Okay, Albert Merquin saying Josh Jacobs was a big surprise based on where he was being drafted. I do think that's one of the hugest.
Yeah. I agree, and he was somebody that people were not high on. They were saying he might not even start because they drafted a rookie guy, White, and I get it. And he really, right now, he wants out of Las Vegas. He already said it. And he wants to sign someplace else, someplace that appreciates him. So I agree with that statement. Josh Jacobs is top 5. Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
Might even be number 1, but certainly top 5.
But I want to hear what you guys go.
Case, go.
Top surprise? I think Geno Smith, Jacobs, the first 10 weeks of the season, was easily the most surprising quarterback, probably. I think Jalen Hurts overall outperformed his draft spot the most at the quarterback position.
Let me say one, actually. The Detroit Lions,
yes.
just in general.
Yeah.
I mean, they were explosive. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown emerged as a true elite wide receiver. Jared Goff played much, much better at home than he did on the road.
Jared Goff does not have an interception the past 4 games. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, well, I have him in Dynasty. I just traded for him, and I'm glad because he was on that brink of could he maybe lose his job or is he solidifying it?
Yes.
I think he's got a lot more run in him now after this.
And I think
Detroit started 1-6. They started the season 1-6.
Yeah.
And they were explosive.
Playoffs at 1-6. I said playoffs.
and they were explosive without Jamison Williams even factoring, except for one catch all year. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown has, for dynasty value, is probably top 6 or 7 in the league now.
And Jamal Williams had a great year. And this is a trigger for Dan. I'm going to say it. Well, watch Dan's face. You guys ready? DeAndre Swift.
DeAndre
Swift.
Didn't get his name right. But remember, once I traded him, I was fine.
I know, I'm teasing.
But I was right, wasn't I?
I get it. I love how that was a big trigger.
Can I get an amen that I was right? I mean, I said it all along.
Of course you were right. That's why I brought it up.
Thank you.
Why we're having fun.
Thank you for the softball we're having fun, and you're smiling. You're not bitter.
That's right.
So who else do you guys think were the big surprises or the big
disappointments?
Let's go disappointments.
Disappointments are the Tampa Bay Bucks offense.
I'll give you one name who was who I was high on, and you guys were like, I don't know if I'm drafting, but I drafted this guy into some leagues. Is Kyle Pitts. I thought Kyle Pitts was going to have a huge year.
I still own him in Dynasty.
I really did, and I said it at the beginning of the season. I said Kyle Pitts, and he did nothing.
He was the Pitts.
He was the Pitts, and I never said anything good about Russell Wilson. I told people to stay away from him, and what happened? You should stay away from him.
Yep. Another pretty big disappointment is Justin Herbert. I mean, I can't blame him. He had the rib problems. His offensive line was decimated. His wide receivers were out. I'm not worried about him in the long run, but he was definitely a disappointment this season.
For being a top 5 quarterback, Dan, you're 100% right. He did not produce like he should have. I don't think he had any touchdown passes last week. I mean, he's been very quiet when it comes to touchdowns, and you can't win your league if your quarterback's not throwing touchdown passes. So there you go.
I think you have to put Tony Pollard on that list of surprises.
Good, not the bad list, the good list.
Right, the good list.
That's the good list.
Do you want another name for the bad list? Who
Oh,
I
yeah,
would
let's
never
hear it.
draft, who I never drafted anyway because I never believed in him, is Kyrie Murray. I would never pick that guy ever
Kyler.
in my league.
Kyler Murray. Yeah.
Kyrie. He loves calling
I mean,
Kyrie.
how tall is Kyler Murray?
He's an inch taller than Flutie.
Which is so he's 5'1".
He's actually a little person in real life. You meet him and it's like he's a little person. I didn't say the M word. I didn't say the M word, guys.
Okay, no. Albert Merquin has brought up Alvin Kamara. Let's talk about Kamara's season.
Disappointing. Yeah,
that's a great one. Yeah, let's talk about him. Yards per carry. I think it's close to like a little under 4. Horrible. He's not catching the ball like he does in the backfield. I think he averages 3 catches a game, which is last season he had 9.
Yeah.
I mean, his role at the Saints is nothing. And you're 100% right. He is not a top tier or top second tier or top even maybe third tier Kasey in fantasy. His career's over.
Well, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, this is a running back we're talking about.
And he looks slow. I mean, if you watch him, he does not.
I was reading an article about him a couple of years ago where like he just didn't take care of himself, and not in the sense of he didn't eat well or exercise. It's like they would say he would play in a game on Sunday afternoon and then that night go play pickup basketball, or like he just wanted to always be doing something.
Yeah.
And I just think, like as Just Bob said, you get about 800 touches in the league. Don't waste 100 of them doing stuff that's not associated with the league.
Just Bob says Saints need, and this is supposed to be a QB for Kamara, but he still might get suspended. So yeah, his value very much up in the air. It's so interesting how many teams are all just hanging in the balance based on their quarterback situation. I mean, when Drew Brees retired in New Orleans, it obviously completely changes the situation from an NFL
Saints
perspective.
Quarterback,
What's that?
Derek Carr would be the Saints quarterback next season.
That I would not be surprised about. That's a good call, Ross.
Yeah.
All right. Mark Andrews, Albert Merquin says, was another big disappointment. That's absolutely true. I mean, this guy was being drafted as a top 2 tight end. And, Darren Waller also was a disappointment, but not at the same level as Mark Andrews because of the expectation level.
Yeah, Mark Andrews got hurt and he didn't have Lamar Jackson for like half the season, so that didn't help him. But
Ross, Just Bob says he likes that call, I believe, about Derek Carr. That really makes a lot of sense to me. You're just connecting the dots. I think actually, I don't know what you guys will think about this because it's not a huge surprise, but I think watching a guy like Tyreek Hill do what he did without Mahomes was, I think, more surprising than watching Mahomes do what he did without Tyreek Hill. I wasn't sure about how that was going to go. I could see Tyreek Hill taking a dip. Another guy that I thought came up huge, obviously Devontae Adams. People said, well, he's away from Aaron Rodgers, he's going to have a dip, and he just didn't. Now, are these guys like huge surprises? No. But these are those little surprises where people got a lot of value because people got Devontae Adams much later than they would have gotten him if he was on the Packers, and he performed the same. I think that's right.
Yeah, his numbers were close enough.
Here's another. I'm not sure if I would call this a surprise, but it is worth noting. Christian Watson, that guy turned out to be a beast.
Talk about a tale of 2 seasons within the same season. Like the first 7 to 8 weeks, like they were talking about, or 10 weeks, they were talking about what a wasted draft pick he was and how bad the Packers scouting was. And then like the last, what do you have? 8 touchdowns in the last 7 games of the season or something like that.
Yeah, well, Rodgers figured out maybe I should throw deep to this guy.
He's fast. He's fast and tall.
Yeah, and he can catch. But he got hurt though, like week 12 or 13. Remember, and it kind of it hurt his season. But
I do think we would be very remiss if we didn't mention Justin Fields in specific in this area.
Yeah.
I mean, he turned a lot of teams around, including the Bears. And he looks like he's the real deal. And what I like about it is they're just letting him be him, from what I can see.
Yeah.
And that's what they needed to do.
I mean, if you guys remember, the Bears were a team that was just bought by a whole new regime. And they came in, and of course, when people buy something new, they want to change the wheel, have their own footprint. That's what people do when they buy something.
Well, and some coaches, and I'm not saying this about the Bears coach. I'm not familiar with the style, but like they have a type of quarterback that they think works their system best. And so they try to turn whoever's there into that type of quarterback.
And then what they did was they let him play his game. They let him do what he wanted to do.
Be a little
and
more creative, which is
he was
what
a
his
weapon.
strength
I mean,
was.
this guy rushed for over 100 yards
Well,
a game, and a lot of times I think he broke the record, right, Casey, for the most yardage for a quarterback in a season.
He might have. I don't know. He reminds me,
I think he
and this is not good for him, but he reminds me a lot of Cam Newton in that respect, where he's a bigger physical running quarterback. But Cam Newton, like 4 years into the league or 5 years into the league, was suddenly.
Well, it takes a toll. It takes a toll
It
when
takes
you're
a
running
toll.
that much.
Remember, guys, you guys are both
Same thing with running back.
licensed therapists, and
Like,
and Cam was somebody that had to go to a therapist every day. I mean, he really had mental issues, and I felt bad for him. I got to work with him a couple times. Nicest kid, nice guy, very enthusiastic, very well mannered, but he's mentally,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
Jalen Hurts, I'm in Pennsylvania, and the Eagles are on Fox almost every weekend because they carry NFC games. So I've seen him play a lot, and he's a mobile quarterback in that same sort of mold as Justin Fields and Kyler Murray. But the big difference between them is you never see Jalen Hurts take a big hit.
Yeah,
he always manages to get out of bounds or go down in a way where he's not getting crushed. And you watched like some of these mobile quarterbacks don't know how to. Let's Robert Griffin III is a perfect example, but they don't know how to protect themselves when suddenly you're in the pros and the linebackers are just as strong and fast as the running backs are, as fast as the running backs, but as strong as the D linemen you faced in college. You can't outrun everybody. And Jalen Hurts does a really nice job of figuring out how to avoid taking a big hit.
We're going to finish up pretty soon here, but Albert Merquin says Devontae Smith was a big surprise.
He won the Heisman. He's not that big of a surprise.
Well, but he's the kind of surprise. He's like almost a post-hype sleeper.
Yeah, a little bit. And because what made it a surprise, what made it a surprise is that he was able to do it with A.J. Brown being the number one target.
Right. I agree with you both that Devontae Smith isn't that much.
He won the Heisman,
but it was, a savvy owner might have seen that coming, but a lot of people weren't going to.
Top college player in the country. What are you talking about?
All right, yes, we got Ross riled up right at the end here. All right, Just Bob says can't get hit like a running back if you're a QB. It just doesn't add up for longevity. I think that's absolutely true.
Yep.
I'm going to mention one other surprise this year, and we'll wrap it up here. Jets running backs. I know Breece Hall came in, very hyped, but rookie running backs sometimes can have trouble, especially on a team like the Jets. He did not. He looked fantastic pretty much right from the start. Unfortunately, the injury took him out for the year.
Yeah.
Then Zonovan Knight comes in.
Knight Rider.
And he was great. I mean, who knew Jets running backs were going to be that good?
If you get rid of Zach Wilson.
Yeah, exactly. Well, guys, we will continue this discussion next week. We're going to talk about anything you guys want. Lots of dynasty football. We'll talk basketball if you guys want to. We're ready to. We're going to even start to talk about baseball. We'll talk about overall strategy. Whatever you guys want, you just let us know. We're here at the same time every week. It's Thursdays, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for being here with us. And thank you, Kasey. And thank you, Ross the Boss.
Have a good weekend, everybody.